mysterious. Bigfoot strikes again. You know, with as many reported Bigfoot sightings as we have nowadays, can we stop calling Bigfoot a cryptid creature? Or when is that line crossed? You tell me. Well, I have two more fun little stories for y'all today. Thanks for coming back to Cryptid Mysterious. Before we get into our first story today, I would really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, drop me a like, and as you all know, I always love hearing where everybody's listening from. So if you drop that down in the comments, I'd love to get in there and say hi. Our first story of the day comes to us from Danielle, a resident of California. I believe the date is somewhere around June of 2003. She begins. I'd gone out for a solo day hike on the Ho River within the confines of the Olympic National Park. Is that pronounced Ho? Really? Or is it just H-O-H? Somebody drop a comment, let me know. I always come here during the week and find the trails to be virtually empty, whereas on the weekends, it's an entirely different story. I come here for the peace and serenity, and when I'm here, the Simon and Garfunkel song, The Sound of Silence, is always running through my mind for some reason. This valley receives well over 100 inches of rainfall annually, and because of the rainfall, the mammoth trees within the park are covered with thick blankets of moss. The forest floor is likewise carpeted with moss and ferns. Even when you see creatures in here moving about, not a single sound can be heard as they do so. When it's not raining, the forest continually creates its own rainfall in the form of water dripping from the moss-soaked branches and limbs of trees. The trail is well marked and well worn, meandering through the forest and leading you ever onward into this fairy tale-like wonderland. The sun was shining brightly on this particular day. As I walked down the trail, the dense canopy above was aglow in hues of bright green and yellow. I found myself rounding a turn on the trail when I heard what sounded like something falling from a tree. It wasn't a loud noise by any means. Anything that does fall in here makes a soft landing on the mossy forest floor, but any sound gets your attention. As I continued forward on the trail, I heard another noise, but this time, I saw some moss and bark falling from a tree ahead of me, off to my right. I was approaching the tree ever so slowly, taking advantage of all the surrounding foliage to conceal myself, when I reached a point where I could see about half the tree's height. I noticed that there was a pile of bark and moss at the base of the tree. A fair amount of the tree's side had been virtually stripped of its bark and mossy covering. Moving several steps closer, most of the tree was in full view. I found myself staring at a huge Bigfoot that was clinging to the tree some 75 feet from the ground. Immediately I stepped back, concealing myself under the branches and leaves of a small tree. The Bigfoot had its back to me, seemingly preoccupied with the tree in front of it. The tree was pinched in between the Bigfoot's feet, while the creature's left hand and arm were holding its body against the trunk. It was reaching with its right hand into a nest of some kind, evidently searching for eggs or young birds. I had no idea what type of nest it was, or what may have been in it, but I did see its hand go to its mouth. From that, I assumed that it had eaten something that came from the nest. After watching it for some 3 or 4 minutes, the creature had evidently harvested whatever was available from the nest and began to rappel back down the tree. It was moving very quickly, and I exited in like fashion. The tree that Bigfoot had climbed was at least 3 feet in diameter. From my vantage point, its body concealed the entirety of the trunk, overlapping it by about a foot on either side. The creature was immense, to say the least. With the fur and hair being somewhat maroon and brown in color, overall I would judge its height as being at least 8 feet. Keeping in mind that the creature was 75 feet from the ground at the time of my sighting. The encounter that day got me thinking that this creature and others like it may very well have been walking about every time I had been in here, and I would never have known it. If you were to walk off the trail into the ferns and moss, this would be akin to walking barefoot on a sea of cotton. Even the dead branches are soaked and softened by the continuous moisture that's present within the park. I have to say that I wasn't afraid when I saw the Bigfoot. Rather, I was in awe. Which is not to say that I wanted to be there when it reached the ground. Well, that's my story. Believe it or not, thanks for listening. That one was an interesting one because generally speaking, when people come across these things, they're absolutely terrified and 9 times out of 10 need to change of pants. Well, let's jump into our second story of the day. This one comes to us. Well, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, would you do that for me real fast? This one comes to us from Clifford. He lives in Arkansas. In the early summer of 2013, my good friend John and I were heading out for an evening to bang out a couple of feral hogs. These B words are taking over the planet, and there are more than a few good old boys who are doing our best to dispose of them. They are good eating, those little B words. As you can tell, I'm kind of trying to keep the channel clean. We had an access and permission to go into a certain large wooded area. We drove in with the truck and were setting up to hunt the last 2 hours of daylight into night. These hogs begin to come out of the woods at this time of day. And if you were to come in here under cover of darkness, the field would be covered with dozens of the buggers. We were already seeing 6 hogs, which were foraging around some 200 yards away, but we were waiting for more to arrive, especially the ones we call the big daddies. Our saying is this: don't waste your lead on Junior when you can pop Big Daddy. The field here is comprised of about 50% flat grass and dirt and 50% tall grass, with the tall grass patches being 3 to 4 feet in height. We'd been moving around slowly for about an hour, only 45 minutes away from sunset, when we started to observe 2 big boars coming into view. It was now about 15 minutes before dark, being the time of twilight, and we hadn't had the opportunity to pull the trigger. It was then, out of the corner of my eye, I started to see something moving in the grass, part of which was just above the top of the tall grass. I will describe to you what I was seeing in this fashion. From my perspective, it looked like the profile of a World War II Army helmet, just at the height of the tallest grass, moving along sporadically and heading in the direction of one of the main body of hogs. It would move and then pause, and then move and then pause again. It kept doing this as it was covering perhaps a 75-yard patch of tall grass. As we were both watching, whatever this was, approaching the spot, it would either have to stay in the tall grass or cross through an open area in order to proceed in the direction of the hogs. It was the latter that occurred. we observed what appeared to be a 10-foot-long black creature of some sort crawling out of the grass on 4 monstrous legs. It was doing so just like a spider across the clearing. It was at least 3 times the size of the biggest hog that was visible, which may, in and of itself, have weighed 600 pounds. The helmet shape that we saw seemed to be its head, which was massive. The two of us exchanged glances as if to say, "What the heck is that?" I had never seen anything like it in all my life. Sitting in the open, as the darkness was now falling, it appeared to be an enormous, fur-covered spider from hell, which had 4 legs and must have weighed well over 1,000 pounds. I can tell you from experience that when something like this occurs, you momentarily feel as though you have entered the twilight zone. In other words, it doesn't quite register with the natural man at the time. I felt that I was caught somewhere in space and time that I didn't want to be, and I was very uncomfortable and on edge. This giant spider thing now entered the grass on the other side of the opening, where we could once again follow its progress by watching the head protruding over the height of the grass. It was moving fast and in spurts, gradually closing the gap between itself and the herd of hogs. It was almost totally dark now, and the spider creature was within perhaps 30 yards of the hogs. Suddenly, this creature, which up until that point had been moving with its body horizontal to the ground, stood up on 2 legs, with a sudden burst of incredible speed, ran at the hogs. We could now see that it was unmistakably a Bigfoot, and it was enormous, 10 foot tall at least. It took about 10 leaps at a rate that I can't even begin to describe. Then, jumping headlong, it had landed on a hog, momentarily disappearing within the grass. We heard a loud squeal from the hog, and then all went silent. Seconds later, the Bigfoot stood to its feet with the hog in its hand, clutching it like a woman holds her handbag. The hog, relatively speaking, was rather small, but it still had to be at least 200 pounds, and this monster was holding it in its right hand. It walked away into the darkness, clutching the hog in its hand, and disappeared from sight. I remember letting out a deep sigh of relief, as though I'd been holding my breath the entire time which we were watching this unfold. The two of us stood to our feet, put our guns on safety, and walked back to the truck, with neither of us being able to believe or comprehend what it was we just seen. This Bigfoot was somehow able, as huge as it was, to contort its body and its legs in a way that was horizontal to the ground and moving like a spider. Next time that you're around a horse, watch the way a horse's legs move as it walks. This Bigfoot's legs were moving in the same fashion, only the difference being the rapidity with which it was able to do so. It moved with such speed that, to the naked eye, it was hard to follow its movements. Neither of us had ever seen a Bigfoot before this day. We'd heard about others seeing them, people who were quite sincere when giving their testimonials about what they'd seen. But this day was a game changer for both of us. It also had shed some light on our finding hogs torn apart and eaten when we were hunting. We'd always wondered what exactly had killed them, but now we both knew. This creature must have committed itself to this spider-like crawl as it left the cover of the trees, and it stayed in this posture to stalk the hogs until it was close enough to leap and run in for the kill. It was beyond belief. Well, there we have it, folks. Appreciate y'all hanging out with me. Let me know what you think about these stories down in the comments. And if you've had a Bigfoot encounter, or of any kind of mysterious experience. I love hearing about it. Drop me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com, and I'll see y'all in the next one.